Claire sat alone in the living room, the soft glow of a lamp spilling across the pages of a book she wasn't really reading. The house was too big when Daniel was away, too silent in a way that made her thoughts louder than she wanted them to be. She had married Daniel 5 years ago, and their marriage was steady, safe, and respectful. But there was always one piece of the puzzle she could never quite place: his son, Ethan. Ethan had been 17 when she first met him. A boy who seemed older than his years, a boy who carried walls around him like armor. Now, at 21, those walls hadn't gone away. He wasn't cold, not exactly, but distant. He joined them at dinners, helped when asked, smiled when expected. Yet Claire often felt like she was only seeing a part of him, never the whole. She wanted to know the rest, but Ethan kept that part locked up tight. That night the silence pressed heavier than usual. Outside, the sky was black and still, but inside, Claire's heart, a quiet storm churned. She set the book aside, trying to calm her restless thoughts. She wondered if Daniel would call before bed, wondered if Ethan was out with friends, wondered if she would spend the entire night staring at the clock. The ticking of the wall clock seemed louder with each passing minute. Then, suddenly the front door opened. The sound startled her. It was past midnight. She looked up, and there he was, stepping into the house, moving with unsteady feet. His shoulders slumped, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. She instantly noticed the change in him. His eyes were glassy, his steps uneven. It didn't take long for her to realize he had been drinking. Claire's breath caught. She had never seen Ethan like this before. He was always controlled, always guarded. Seeing him vulnerable, even messy, sent a rush of concern through her chest. She stood quickly, the book forgotten on the couch. "Ethan," she called softly. He looked up, his gaze hazy, but there was something in his eyes she had never seen before. Not the sharp, distant look she was used to, but something fragile, almost broken. He tried to smile, but it faltered as he stumbled into the living room. "Claire." His voice was low, unsteady. It sent a chill down her spine. She moved toward him without thinking, her instincts stronger than hesitation. She caught his arm just before he lost his balance and guided him to the couch. He sank into the cushions, running a hand over his face as though the weight of the world was pressing down on him. Claire knelt beside him, her hand hovering close, unsure if she should touch his shoulder or keep her distance. "What happened?" she asked gently. For a long moment, he said nothing. He just stared at the floor, breathing hard, his chest rising and falling as if the words he wanted to say were too heavy to lift. Claire's heart ached. This was the boy she had watched grow into a man, the boy who had always kept her at arm's length. And now here he was, breaking in front of her. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "I thought drinking would help me forget. But it didn't. It just made everything worse." The honesty of his words hit her harder than she expected. Forget what? She wondered. What was he carrying that weighed him down so much? She searched his face for answers. But all she saw was pain, the kind of pain he had never let her see before. Claire wanted to say the right thing. To reach him, to ease whatever was hurting him so deeply. But before she could speak, he lifted his eyes to hers. And for the first time since she had known him, he didn't look away. His gaze locked on hers with an intensity that made her chest tighten. She realized in that moment that this was no ordinary night. Something had cracked open in Ethan, something he had kept hidden for far too long. And as much as she wanted to stop time, to prepare herself for what might come next, she knew there was no going back. The quiet house around them seemed to hold its breath. The storm outside her heart had finally reached the surface, and it was only the beginning. Ethan leaned back against the couch, his head tilted, his eyes struggling to stay open. The dim light in the living room made his face look softer, younger, but the pain in his expression was clear. Claire sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She wanted to give him space, but she also knew this moment mattered. He had opened a door, and if she didn't listen, it might close forever. "I thought drinking would help," he muttered again, shaking his head. But it just made everything worse. His voice was low, like he was ashamed of saying it out loud. Claire swallowed hard, keeping her tone calm. Help with what, Ethan? His jaw clenched, and he pressed his hands together as though holding something fragile. With the way I feel, with everything I've been trying to push down, the words made her chest tighten. She had sensed for years that Ethan carried something inside him, but she had never expected him to admit it. Tonight, though, the walls were down. She could see the rawness in his eyes. It's the truth slipping out in a way he couldn't control. I know I shouldn't say this, he whispered, but I can't keep pretending. I can't keep acting like it doesn't matter. Her breath caught. She leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle. Ethan, what is it that you've been hiding? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and the honesty in his gaze shook her to her core. It's you, Claire. It's always been you. The words hit her like a wave. She blinked, unsure if she had heard him right. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The air between them grew heavy, charged with something she didn't know how to name. You've been the only one who ever saw me, he continued, his voice trembling. Not just as Daniel's son, not just as someone passing through this house, but as me. You noticed when I was quiet. You cared when I was drowning inside, and I can't stop feeling it. Claire's heart pounded. She wanted to speak, to stop him before the words went further, but part of her couldn't move. She had always cared for Ethan, always worried about him more than she admitted, but hearing him say this stirred something dangerous in her chest. Ethan, she said softly, forcing herself to meet his eyes, you've had too much to drink. You're saying things you might not mean. But he shook his head quickly, his hair falling into his eyes. No, this isn't the alcohol. I've felt this for years. Tonight just made it too hard to keep quiet. His voice cracked at the end, like he was breaking under the weight of his confession. She rose from her chair, pacing a few steps away, trying to breathe through the whirlwind inside her. You don't know what you're saying, she whispered, though she knew he did. She could see it in his eyes, the truth, raw and unguarded. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands pressed to his face. I know it's wrong. I know I shouldn't feel this way. But I can't stop. And I can't keep carrying it alone. Claire turned back to him, her throat tight. He wasn't a boy anymore. He was a man standing at the edge of something that could change everything. She felt torn between wanting to protect him and wanting to protect herself. You don't understand, she said, her voice breaking. This isn't something you can just say and walk away from. It changes everything. I don't care, he said quickly, lifting his head. His eyes were red, his voice shaking. I needed you to know. Even if it ruins everything, I needed you to hear it. The room fell into silence, heavy and charged. Claire stood frozen, her hands trembling, her heart racing. She had wanted closeness with him for years, but never this. Not this. She sat back down slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan, you're hurting, and I want to help you. But you can't put this on me. Not like this. He gave a broken laugh, shaking his head. I knew you'd say that. I knew you'd push it away. But at least I said it. At least it's not locked up anymore. Claire's eyes burned with unshed tears. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that this was just a phase, that he'd forget it in the morning. But deep inside, she knew his words came from somewhere real, somewhere he had been hiding for years, and that terrified her. Go upstairs, she said softly, her voice steadying. Get some rest. We'll talk when you're clear-headed, but he didn't move. He just stared at her, his gaze full of longing and regret. You don't understand, he whispered. I can't take it back now. Claire held her breath, her pulse racing. She knew this night had opened something that could never be closed again. Ethan had spoken the words she had never expected to hear, and now the quiet safety of her home would never feel the same. The clock ticked loudly in the silence, each second dragging the moment deeper into her chest. Claire wanted to rewind time, to stop the door from opening, to keep Ethan from ever stepping inside with that look in his eyes. But it was too late. The confession was out, fragile and undeniable. And it would follow her no matter what she tried to do next, and in the dim glow of the lamp, with Ethan's words still echoing in her heart, she realized the night had only just begun. The silence in the living room stretched longer than Claire could bear. Ethan's words still hung in the air, heavy, impossible to ignore. He sat slouched forward, his hands clasped together, his head bent low like he was ashamed, yet relieved all at once. Claire stood a few steps away, her chest rising and falling as if she had just run miles. She couldn't breathe normally, couldn't think clearly. His confession had cracked the world she thought she knew. "Ethan," she said at last, her voice trembling but firm, "this can't happen. You understand that, don't you?" He lifted his head slowly. His eyes were glassy but sharp now, holding hers with an intensity that made her stomach twist. "I understand," he whispered, "but that doesn't change it." Her throat tightened. She wanted to be angry, to scold him for saying something so reckless, but all she saw in his expression was pain. He wasn't trying to hurt her. He wasn't even trying to tempt her. He was breaking open in front of her, showing her the truth he had hidden for too long. That truth frightened her more than anything. She crossed her arms, trying to steady herself. "You're not yourself tonight. This is the alcohol talking." But he shook his head, his movements slow, deliberate. "No, the alcohol only made me brave enough to say it. I've felt this for years, Claire. Every time you smiled at me, every time you asked if I was okay, I wanted to tell you. But I couldn't. Tonight, it just came out." Her heart raced faster. She had noticed his silence before, the way he lingered in the kitchen when she cooked, the way his eyes sometimes followed her when he thought she wasn't looking. She had brushed it aside, told herself it was just her imagination. Now she realized it was. Claire sat back down, keeping a careful distance between them. "You can't confuse care with something else," she said softly. "I've always wanted you to feel at home, to feel like you belonged here. That's what this is." But Ethan leaned forward, shaking his head. "It's not just that. I know the difference. I've thought about this too long, too hard to mistake it for kindness. You're more than that to me." The words pierced her. She wanted to deny them, to shut them down before they could settle into her own heart. But a small, dangerous part of her recognized the truth. She had always cared for Ethan in ways she couldn't quite explain. She had felt the pull of his silence, the weight of his loneliness, and it had bound her to him in quiet, unspoken ways. Hearing him speak it aloud stirred something inside her she wished she could bury. "Ethan," she said again. "Firmer this time. You'll regret this tomorrow. You'll wake up and wish you never said it." His lips curved into a broken smile. "No, Claire. Tomorrow I might regret the timing, but I'll never regret the truth." She felt her body tense, her hands twisting in her lap. "This isn't fair," she whispered. "Fair?" His voice cracked, almost desperate. "It hasn't been fair for years. Pretending I didn't feel this? Pretending you didn't notice?" Her eyes widened. "Notice?" He nodded, his gaze unwavering. "You know. Maybe you never admitted it to yourself, but you felt it too. That pull, that connection. You're feeling it right now. I can see it." Claire's breath hitched. She wanted to deny it, to shut him down completely, but her silence betrayed her. Ethan leaned closer, his voice low and rough. "Tell me I'm wrong, Claire. Tell me you've never felt it, and I'll never bring it up again." Her chest tightened painfully. The words caught in her throat. She wanted to say them, to put the wall back between them, but they wouldn't come. And that was the answer he needed. The air grew heavy, charged with something unspoken but undeniable. Claire felt trapped between reason and feeling, between what was right and what her heart refused to let go of. She rose quickly, needing distance, needing space. "This can't happen," she said again, her voice sharp with panic. Ethan stood too, his movements unsteady but full of determination. I know what it means, what it could destroy. But I can't pretend anymore." She backed toward the hallway, her hands trembling. "You're hurting, Ethan. That's why this feels stronger than it is. You need rest. You need to forget this night." But he stepped closer, stopping just short of her. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't want to forget. Not this. Not you." Her heart pounded so hard she thought he could hear it. She felt the space between them closing, the line blurring with every breath. She wanted to scream at him to stop, to pull him back into the safety of silence. But part of her didn't move. Part of her stood frozen, caught in the honesty of his confession. caught in the dangerous truth of her own feelings. Finally, she forced herself to speak, her voice breaking. "Go upstairs, Ethan, please. End this before it goes too far." He held her gaze for a long, painful moment. She saw the battle in his eyes, the longing, the regret, the helplessness. Then he stepped back, his shoulders slumping. "You're right," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You're right." She watched him turn away, watched him walk toward the staircase with slow, heavy steps. Her chest ached as if every step he took pulled something from her too. When he reached the top of the stairs, he paused and glanced back, his eyes dark with something unspoken. Then he disappeared into the hallway. Claire stood in the silence, her body trembling, her mind spinning. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to calm the storm inside her. She had stopped him tonight, but she knew the truth. Nothing was truly stopped. His words, his eyes, his confession, they would linger, haunting her. Reshaping the air in every room of the house was silent again, but Claire could not feel calm. She sank onto the couch, her hands gripping the cushions as if they might hold her steady. Upstairs, Ethan's footsteps faded, and with them, the fragile moment that had nearly broken everything. She tried to breathe slowly, tried to convince herself it was over, but her heart would not settle. His words kept echoing in her chest, raw and unshakable. "I can't stop feeling it." Claire pressed her palms over her face. She wanted to erase the sound of his voice, the look in his eyes, but she couldn't. For years, she had told herself her care for Ethan was only maternal, only protective, only what any stepmother should feel. Tonight had shattered that belief. She had felt it too, the pull, the connection, the unspoken current that lived in the space between them. She hated herself for it, but she couldn't deny it. The stairs creaked, and her heart lurched. She looked up, half expecting Ethan to appear again, but the sound faded. He was in his room. She was safe, or at least, she should have been. Minutes dragged into hours. Claire stared at the darkened television screen, her mind replaying every moment of the night, the stumble through the door, the fragile confession, the way he had begged her to admit she felt it too. She had stopped him, yes, but only with words. Inside, she knew the truth was still burning. At last she rose and walked quietly to the bottom of the stairs. She paused there, her hand gripping the banister, her body trembling. She wanted to go up, to check if he was okay, to make sure he hadn't fallen asleep in his clothes or left the window open. But she knew the real reason her feet itched to climb the stairs. She wanted to see him again. She forced herself back into the living room, whispering, "No, this has to end here." Her voice broke as she said it. But she knew it was the only way. The night stretched endlessly. When dawn began to soften the sky, Claire still hadn't closed her eyes. She made coffee, her movements sharp and mechanical, as if busy hands could silence a restless heart. She thought about Daniel, about the promises she had made when she said yes to him. He had trusted her, had built a life with her. How could she allow even the shadow of betrayal to creep in? But then she thought about Ethan, the sadness in his voice, the way he had carried so much alone. Her chest ached with the memory. She wanted to comfort him, to tell him he wasn't wrong to feel, even if the feelings themselves could never be acted on. She wanted to hold him the way she couldn't last night. The sound of footsteps on the stairs broke her thoughts. Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway, his hair messy, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. He looked younger, almost like the boy she had first met years ago. But when his eyes found hers, the weight of last night returned instantly. "Morning," he said, his voice rough. Claire set down the coffee pot, her hands trembling. "Morning." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. He moved to the counter, poured himself a glass of water, and leaned against the sink. For a moment, it almost felt normal, just to people starting the day. But the memory of his confession hovered between them, impossible to ignore. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "About last night." Claire's breath caught. She braced herself. "I shouldn't have said it," he whispered. "I know it puts you in a terrible position. I'm sorry." She closed her eyes for a second, relief and sadness flooding her at once. He was trying to undo the damage, trying to carry the weight alone again. She wanted to thank him, to let him bury it, and move on. But she also knew those words weren't false. They weren't just drunken slips. They were the truth. "You don't have to apologize," she said softly. "You were honest?" "In honesty. It matters." He looked at her sharply, as if searching her face for something more. "So you don't hate me?" Her chest tightened. "No, Ethan. I could never hate you." The words came out too tender, too full of feeling. She saw the flicker in his eyes, the same longing from the night before, and she quickly looked away. She picked up her mug, pretending to sip, though her hands shook. Ethan set his glass.